Imagine the following scenario. John wants to buy a car with Bitcoin. He finds a sports car dealer who accepts Bitcoin. John buys an awesome orange Lamborghini for 10 Bitcoin. Right after the payment is made and included in the blockchain as the top block, John drives away in his new Lambo. The vendor has delivered the product with no delay. However, the vendor didn't know that John had colluded with Mr. Lee, who is a miner. Actually, Mr. Lee operates a huge mining pool with a lot of processing power. Think about a big data center full of computers focused exclusively on mining on the Bitcoin blockchain. Mr. Lee immediately remines the same block containing John's payment to the car vendor, but this time the new remined block sends the same 10 Bitcoin back to John's wallet. This is double spending. The same coins have been spent twice. John got the Lambo and his money back, so he got the Lambo for free. This situation creates a fork in the blockchain, meaning that two different blocks were mined at the same height of the blockchain. In other words, they were mined on top of the same parent block in very close proximity. The next thing Mr. Lee does is continue mining on the chain containing the double-spent transaction to extend it and validate it further as the longest chain. This kind of consensus attack is known as a 51% attack. Despite the name, it doesn't actually require 51% of the network hashing power. 51% is rather the threshold at which such an attack is almost guaranteed to succeed. Such a scenario could be prevented easily if the vendor waits for more block confirmation before delivering the goods. Generally, it takes 6 block confirmations to consider a transaction pretty much immutable. Therefore, it is recommended for large value purchases to be delivered at least after 6 block confirmations, which amounts to waiting for an hour. Small value items such as a cup of coffee can be delivered faster, after just 1 block confirmation, or even before any block confirmations at all. This is because vendors' risk is limited to a small amount, while customers wouldn't like to wait much for their coffee. Although block confirmations ensure the transaction has been accepted by the whole network, a vendor can still accept a small valid transaction with no delay. This is similar to a credit or debit card payment made without an ID, signature, or PIN code, which is a common practice for low-value purchases nowadays. So, waiting for a sufficient number of block confirmations is one way to provide security against potential 51% attacks and double spending. Another protection embedded in the system comes from the miner's economic resources at stake. As we said, mining blocks and calculating proof of work consumes a lot of resources. If some miners decide to attack and take control of the network for their own benefit, this would be a very risky and expensive strategy. It would require an immense amount of computing power to succeed. We already mentioned the gigantic amount of hash power plugged into the Bitcoin network, so this is what any delinquent miners like Mr. Lee from our illustrative example here would need to compete with in order to tamper with the distributed ledger. The more blocks that are built on top of a given block, the more confirmations it has, and the harder it is to be manipulated. If some miners want to change a previous block in order to create double-spent transactions, divert funds, or for any other reason, they would need to remine all subsequent blocks. Moreover, all this work would be done basically for free, as they wouldn't earn any meaningful rewards on remined blocks. This is the case because their alternative chain would be competing with the original chain to become the longest and main chain of blocks. If not the longest, it would be ignored by the network, and no other miners would validate it by working on extending it. Remember, miners always start building their new blocks on top of the longest existing chain, which contains the most cumulative proof of work done since the Genesis block, the first block ever created. In this way, and by linking each block to its parent block through hashes that contain all the block information, the entire network validates and confirms each and every transaction ever made on the blockchain. Every 10 minutes, when a new block is added to the blockchain, all transactions, right to the first one Satoshi made when he created Bitcoin, are revalidated and reconfirmed by the entire network. Consider also that while non-compliant nodes are remining past blocks, all the other honest nodes keep mining and extending the original main blockchain. Therefore, the non-compliant nodes need to keep mining at a faster rate than the rest of the network, deploying more processing power and consuming more electricity without any meaningful compensation. The further back in time such an attack on the blockchain occurs, the lower the chance that it would be feasible. And we are not talking years here, and not even months. We are talking weeks and days. There are 144 block confirmations occurring every 24 hours. As we already mentioned, 100 block confirmations are required by the Bitcoin protocol for block reward coins to become spendable, so this is considered long enough to mitigate the risk of potential conflicts of interest for miners. That's why it's so hard for an attacker to manipulate or take control over the Bitcoin blockchain. Now that the network has been live and up and running for almost a decade, the computer power plugged in mining, supporting the blockchain and following the rules of the protocol, is enormous. This architecture probably makes it much more robust than any other payment network infrastructure that has ever existed.